How are you? It's good to see you today. We're going to spend a bit of time in this video. We're going to introduce global marketing, and we're going to talk about like evaluating. There are going to be four broad areas to evaluate when we look at global markets. Um, so here's the deal. When you go into a global market, you're redefining the market segment. And just like you have business environmental, like evaluations for your domestic business, you also have the exact same types of things to look at in a foreign market that could influence your ability to do business there. And so, foreign markets can be different, not only culturally, but also economically and technologically and politically. And so there's, kind of a relearning, I guess, of the business environment. So as you do your evaluation of your own like marketing plan, you might evaluate kind of like with a SWOT analysis, like like the environment, business environment around you. You got to duplicate that. You got to replicate that basically for a global market, if that's what you want to try to go into. Okay, so this concept then of globalization is when we bring our products across, to other cultures and to other nationalities, to other, and really just think of it as different markets, right? So we have a market here, well, we have a market there. Just because it's in a different location, it just means it's a different market, that's all. It's kind of like if you were to say, well, look, I'm going to sell my product in South Carolina, but I'm looking to expand and sell my product in Georgia. Well, you'd say, okay, well, those are just two different geographic locations, but the culture and sort of the laws and the way people maybe do business might be a little bit different there than the way they do business here. It may not be, but it might be. So, and again, now think, well, I'm going to sell my product not only here, but in California. Well, there are a whole bunch of different laws and regulations in California than there are in South Carolina. And we need to know those, and we need to do a scan and understand those. Now, let's say, okay, I'm going to sell my product in Canada or in Mexico. Again, it's just relearning the business environment that your market exists in. And so that's all we're doing. We're just doing it kind of in situations where it might be vastly different. I mean, selling my product here and understanding my market, who my market is in South Carolina, is going to be significantly different in Ghana or in Ethiopia or in Russia or Ecuador, right? I mean, so just imagine your markets and how different they might be. So that's kind of the root of what we're talking about here. So assessing global markets. It's kind of what we're talking about in this video. There's four big areas. Again, just consider this like an environmental scan that you would do at the beginning of any marketing plan. Think of it as a SWOT analysis, only it's the external pieces, the O and the T. And this is what you've got. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these government actions, social, cultural types of analyses. We'll look at what's called Hofstede's cultural dimensions for that, infrastructure, technology, and then the economy. So first, the economy, evaluating general economic kind of space. And there's kind of big things. So if you are familiar at all with economics, especially macroeconomics, there are going to be big indicators that tell us whether the economy is doing well, whether it's in a recession, whether it's in a growth period. Trade deficits that countries may have an impact to the degree in which they import or export goods. So this is something that we worry about when we're bringing a good to another country. Will that country accept your product, or will they try to protect manufacturers who already produce that product in their own country? Think about that. So just because you want to sell in another country doesn't mean you're allowed to. And it may have or will have impact on broad economic measures. So one would be a trade deficit or surplus. Trade deficits occur when a country exports more than it imports, generally speaking. So, or it imports more than it exports. I'm sorry, trade deficit is when you bring in more than you send out. So a deficit suggests local domestic markets have competition for foreign companies. Generally, a firm wants to expand into countries that have a trade surplus, meaning that they generally export more than they import. Your foreign brand to them may be unique, in other words. So if you export a lot of goods, your country exports a lot of goods, when imports come in, they may seem unique to the local market. And that's what you want to do. You want to stand out and you want to be unique. So that might be a good thing. So think about surplus versus deficits. How many, to the degree in which a company exports goods versus imports goods. And if you could be one of the very few importers, then that could be a very good thing for you. So think of it that way. Gross domestic product and then national income. So the GDP is an aggregate measure of domestic production. So how much manufacturing and how much production is done within the domestic domain. National income includes investments to foreign markets. It may be a more accurate measure of local economy for goods. Local company that does a lot of business overseas contributes more to GNI than GDP. Global measures. If a GDP is particularly small or large, it may indicate how much buying power the company, the people of the country have, how much is done there, right? So are you talking about big economy or small economy? What are their GDPs? Purchasing power parity, or PPP, purchasing parity. So basically the idea of this is when we go around the world, products have different value, and some products, in some economies, products are either valued more or less. So here's the example is, let's say you're going to travel and you're taking your US dollar, and you know that your US dollar will buy a certain product here. Well, the question is, how much of that product will that $1 still buy when you're overseas? So this is kind of a unique thing. So this is totally an exchange rate thing. Exchange rates of so if the exchange rate's equal, then how much more or less product can you buy is the question that you basically ask when you're talking about purchasing parity. Again, economic concepts here can be kind of challenging. So so don't let me go too fast. And if you haven't had economics, then you need to probably read in your textbook a little bit more and get these concepts down. All right. Fun little idea about a purchasing power parity here. Here's the Big Mac Index. So the Big Mac Index was created by a magazine called, or a newspaper called Financial Times. It's a very popular British newspaper. And this was developed to compare exchange rate or buying power when exchange rates are equal. So the example here is a person in the US versus a person in Azerbaijan, which is a country just north of Iran, just south of Russia, in and around the Middle East, not quite, but kind of in there. The Caucasus Mountains are right there near it. So the exchange rate between the U.S. and Azerbaijan, when this was done, it's 170%, meaning that $1 US is worth 1.7 manat. That's what that is. So with this in mind, a Big Mac in the U.S., at the time, $5.15. It should cost $8.76 manat in Azerbaijan. That's if things are equal, right? Yet, in reality, it only costs $4.70. So that same Big Mac that you got in the U.S., it doesn't cost you as much in Azerbaijan. So the actual purchase power of the manat, it's undervalued by 46%. So you get more for your money. Is the end of the day is what it means. You get more for your money if you own U.S. dollars and you're spending in Azerbaijan. So this is actually really important when you think about manufacturing. So if you manufacture in, say, Azerbaijan, and your costs are in Azerbaijan, and then you go to sell your product in the U.S., you're going to make a lot more money. If your costs are in U.S. and you go to sell in Azerbaijan, you're going to make a lot less money because of this, because of these disequilibriums when it comes to purchase power and costs of production. And again, it's kind of like if I have a product and in absolute dollars, I have to have a certain profit margin, might not be possible for me to sell in some of these markets and still make my margin. So that's another reason why we need to think about that. Okay, other things, so, okay, that was a lot. So when we talk about economics, again, those are heady, kind of tough concepts to think about quite a bit. So so you got to go back and really review those. Another category, though, and we're going to kind of move along here. Another category is transportation, or it's infrastructure. So infrastructure to do business. Can I do business? Is there the infrastructure? And when we look at this, there's going to be kind of 5 big areas that I want you to focus on. Transportation is certainly the infrastructure of the new market. Like, are the roads good? Are there ports? Can I import? Can I export? Can I distribute my product, and how will I distribute it across the country? Are the rail systems? In some cases, the railroad systems are far better than the road systems. In some cases, you don't have access to airports. So, just depending on, you got to evaluate kind of that infrastructure to move product. Distribution channels can include those, maybe in transportation, but like, are there warehouses? Are there warehouses that have refrigeration? Are the warehouses safe? Will they not spoil my goods or get stolen, right? Maybe you can't store goods. Maybe you have to bring in product only that will sell that week, okay? And then that's something that you have to deal with. So that's a distribution system thing. You might also include in distribution system, it has retail outlets here. So are there malls? Are there stores? Do we have a distributor who we can work with? Big question there. Okay. Communications, so communication infrastructures. Do they use the internet? Yes, probably. In most cases, countries have digital technologies that far exceed other technologies like television and radio. So digital technologies are very, very common in most even developing economies. Person oftentimes doesn't have a computer, but they have a phone, and they use the phone to do all of their work. So that's often very common. A legal system, and then also a commerce system. So when a legal system is important, it's because of contracts more than anything else. And so if you have a contract with somebody, many cultures, some cultures, you just simply can't trust that the contract will be fulfilled, and the law system or the legal system won't protect you. So you just have to know that going in. You have to have other leverages over your business partner. Commerce, access to credit, banking systems, those types of things. That's kind of the deal with that. Okay, so infrastructure. Evaluate that before you start going into a foreign market. Tariffs, quotas, trade agreements, exchange controls. These are all elements that are associated with controlling imports. So these are government actions. There may be other government actions too that relate to product distribution, product labeling. It's a big deal. Local ownership. So sometimes in order to sell to a market, you have to have a business in the market, or you have to be a local owner. So those are things that might come up. These specifically, though, talk about restrictions and the impact of you being able to bring your product into the market, either in quantity or at a certain cost. So tariffs are imposed when we it's an extra tax, basically. A tariff is a tax that we charge when a foreign company wants to bring their product into our marketplace. So if you're the seller, you may have to pay an extra tax or tariff in order to bring your product to the marketplace. The effect is that if you have to pay that tax, then you're going to raise your price, and the local market will pay more for your product, or have to pay more. And so it has this effect of limiting or dampening demand for your product. Okay, so again, it's kind of like a demand control method that the local government may impose. And think about it this way: if you're bringing a product into a country, it means that the domestic producer of that country, of that product in that country, is not going to do as well. So the government may want to protect the domestic producer. They offer a tariff, and that makes your price higher, which means your demand for your product will be lower, benefiting the local domestic supplier. So think of it as a protection thing. Quotas are an actual quantity limit. So sometimes a country will say, well, look, we're importing a certain amount of this material or this product. We're just going to cap it at a certain number. We're only going to, for instance, import 1 million barrels of oil this year, and the rest of our oil will come from domestic sources. But once we hit that million, then we're going to stop. Okay, so obviously it serves to reduce the availability of imported goods, so we can't import as many. But it also, again, protects domestic production. Both benefit domestically made products. They both serve to reduce foreign competition. So if you go into another market, you need to know whether you're going to have to pay these tariffs or if there are quotas involved. What gets around this is this idea of a trade agreement. So trade agreements are pretty popular. There are oftentimes trade agreements that happen between regions or formed into regions. So a trading bloc might exist by several different countries at once. The United States has its own set of trade agreements. These are regional trade agreements or blocks. There are 354 around the world. We're in the middle of 14 of them. There's something called the USMCA, which is formerly known as NAFTA. So the United States, the Mexico, and Canada agreement is wildly successful, and it's a good trading bloc for us three countries. We're in other countries, so we're in other trade agreements, though, with these other countries, Iran, Canada, we know of, Colombia, Jordan, Korea, and so forth. So trade blocs and trading countries will eliminate tariffs, will lower tariffs, will lower trade restrictions in order to encourage trade between our countries. Okay, so that's a good thing. Right? All right, and those are government actions. All right, so, oh man, we're covering a lot. There's a lot here to look at. The last area that we'll look at is the social cultural components. Now, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Again, we look at culture, we look at buying habits that are formed as a result of culture. And there is one theory that's used a lot, and so that's why it's mentioned here. The textbook outlines it quite a bit. It's called Hofstede's cultural dimensions, Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and there are 6 of them. Okay, there are 6 different cultural dimensions, and so power distance is this idea that you have ability to impact your decision making and how much power you have, in terms of your ability to control an outcome or not control an outcome. Consider it like your willingness to accept fate versus your determination to control the situation. So power to be able to control your own destiny, I guess, is a good way to think of power distance, and it's actually measured as an index. Second out of these 6, uncertainty avoidance. Some folks like to, they're called risk averse. They want to avoid risk. Other people are more comfortable with risk. So in a cultural sense, risk takers are innovators, people who want to jump out and try new things and accept things they're not used to. Individualism versus collectivism are 2 different dimensions. So people who act alone by nature or culture, Western Europe and the United States tend to be very thought of as scoring high on individualism, whereas collectivism would be a sense of community or communal living where people rely more on each other. Would be the 2 big kind of benchmarks of that dimension. Masculinity, so a male-dominated or masculine-dominated culture exists where it's a gender orientation thing, where decision makings and power are dominated by a gender type in the aspects of masculinity. Time orientation. Are you short-term or long-term oriented? Do you make decisions for now or for later, or kind of from a temporal sense, how impacted are you by time? And that's a little bit related to the concept of indulgence, whereas indulgence is this notion of wanting to not just give in to a need or a want, but being indulgent about it, being over the top, and satisfying your needs completely without regard of either others or resources. And so being non-indulgent would be where you are culturally, you are okay resisting. So consumerism, for instance, is a good example of an indulgent behavior, where you buy and buy and buy with little regard to what you actually need. And the opposite of that would be to hold off and only buy what you need, restrict your spending to limit your expenses and things like that. So not giving into your indulgence, I guess. So, all right, so this is like one big theory, but it is a big one. So there's one way you say, okay, like I'm going into the new global market, what do I look for? What's the business environment like? When we're talking about culture and social issues, again, this is one great model. So understand and know each of these. It's important to do that. Here's a graphic just illustrating some different positions of countries as they fall on these different dimensions. And we have power distance versus individualism. So again, power distance is this idea where you accept fate and reality versus you're in control of your own destiny. And individualism is where I'm going to do it myself and I'm going to charge forward. And you'll notice the individual ones that score high tend to be your Western European, Northern North America countries. So that's kind of the way those are. Group, and this is just, it looks like a lot of South American countries and Central American countries kind of fall in that area where We're out of our control. A lot of things are out of our control, but we're going to be a family. We're going to do this together. That's kind of the way those think. Those elements kind of go together that way. The last thing that we're going to talk about are, and this is again kind of falls in this sociocultural bit. And I know there's a lot here. There's a lot in this video. I get that. The concept of the BRIC countries. So you need to know BRIC, B-R-I-C. And the BRIC countries are developing economy countries that are major players in the world economy, largely because of their size, and partially because of the rate in which they're growing. So Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Now, these economies are not, they're not like what we would in the old days called third world. They are technologically advanced. They lack some of the structure that we would ideally want, but largely they're growing very quickly and they're very large. They're very big, and so they're probably not as developed as a Western economy, but they're definitely big contributors to the world economy. So market size is a big deal. Growth rate is a big deal. Russia is not particularly growing fast, but these other countries are. Russia is a big country, has a huge amount of natural resources, right? Adaptability, acceptance of technology is a big deal. All these countries are high-tech countries, or I take that back. They have pockets of high technology where high technology is abundant and available. It's not pervasive through the entire economy. So in other words, in Western economies or more developed economies, high tech is available to more people. In these economies, it's available, but not to more people, not to everybody. Generally, these countries are very brand focused. They like the idea of brands, but they all also typically will have very favorable exchange rates. And they also offer very favorable local production capacities. So again, we talked earlier about this idea of producing in one country and selling in another, and how exchange rates impact that. Well, here's a great example where if you produce in a low-cost area and you sell in a high-price area, then you make a lot more money than the reverse. Okay. Again, the favorability, though, of China and India, Brazil especially, is their market growth rate. Here in the United States, our growth rate is flat. We have about 340, 350 million people, but our growth rate is virtually flat. So in other words, we're not growing very quickly in terms of numbers. Over there, in those countries, we're talking millions, they're talking billions, and their growth rates are much faster. So they have a lot more consumers who can buy products. So that's their big appeal. Okay, all right, so we have covered so much material. Let's talk, just break it into the 4 areas. Okay, take each of the 4 areas and know something about each of the 4. So for instance, in the economy, know about GDP, know about GNI, the national income, the gross national income, GNI. Know about purchasing parity and the Big Mac index. Okay, so think about those big things for sure. Know about this idea of tariffs and quotas. Understand that those things hurt our ability to sell product, and they limit demand for our product if we try to sell it in another country. Those are protective actions, but you can also form trade agreements. And so if you look to expand in a country for whom we have a trade agreement with, that's what you look for, right? That would be a good thing to look for if you're expanding into another country. Socially, look at Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Think about those 6 different areas of ways we describe countries, and understand that. And then finally, these BRIC country concepts. No BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Some people will add an S and put South America on the S, but that's you might see that as well, but you want to know BRIC and know that they're growing quickly, except for Russia, and that they have a very, very large market size. They all are very favorable, generally speaking, to U.S. brands, the brands that we have to offer. So, all right, have a great day. Again, reach out to me if you have any questions. Be sure to pause, make sure you understand everything on this screen, and you're able to talk about all these different elements of the situation as you go into a new economy and market. All right, thanks.